Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's learning series, Empathizing with Guests in a COVID-19 World. Our goal today is to offer some guidance for operating safely and effectively, and to offer some thoughts on how accesso can help you do that. My name is George Hambleton, Vice President of Sales here at accesso, and I'm joined by Sales Director Jeremy Gray. The reality is that technology has always been a critical piece of the puzzle. We believe strongly that your technology should give you the tools you need to solve problems, not create them. Overall, we recognize this is a challenging time for our industry. We want to make sure we are supporting our clients as best we can, and we hope the information we are sharing today can help you strengthen your business and serve your guests when the time comes to welcome them back to your venue.
So hello everyone, my name is Jeremy, and what I want to go through today is going to talk about everything we've kind of learned over the last few months. And as we're all aware, we're going globally through a major crisis right now, which is really bringing everyone together in real time. These are really unprecedented times. People are dealing with a range of emotions, and the new normal has been redefined and is constantly still being redefined. Rage, fear, sadness, and grief are all now much more common emotions in our society. The types of messages and marketing that used to appeal to consumers are no longer relevant. Innovative organizations have long been able to tap into consumer feelings and motivations, and the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the increasing importance of this as businesses everywhere are seeking to adapt to how guests are now feeling. I wanted to start by taking you back a few decades to when Steve Jobs was challenged on why he was making technology that didn't fit with the thoughts of the IT community at the time. He famously said he wanted to identify the guest experiences that consumers wanted to enjoy, and then find and build technologies to address these desires. He put himself in the mind of the consumer, not in the mind of the manufacturer. He and Apple went on to have great success, as we all know, based on his desire to explore the demands of the consumers and empathize with them. Now, that didn't mean he couldn't be pioneering, obviously he was, but he put his customers and his people first. So today we'll be exploring about how this strategy can help you exceed your guest expectations now and in the future. And the first way around that then is part of our three-step framework, which is really to explore the minds of the consumers in the current crisis. Help them build a journey to address their concerns and meet them in a current moment in time, but really to embrace transformation towards that people-first, empathy-based approach that we've seen succeed in the past. So let's explore the mindset of consumers in the current crisis. That's really where we need to start off on this and work out what the trends are relevant to our industry. So the first movement is obviously into online purchasing. Although this obviously isn't a new concept, the growth in digital and online activities has been absolutely unprecedented, I'm sure you'll agree, in recent months. In Europe, for example, digital adoption has risen from 81 to 95% during the crisis. This shift in consumer behavior, which would normally taken 2 to 3 years in normal times, has now happened in just a short period. And it shows no signs of slowing down. In a recent survey by McKinsey's, 70% of respondents say they expect to continue using digital services with the same frequency in the future as they do now, or if not even more so. Everyone always uses Amazon, a great example of this, and so will I. And the fact that grabbed me most was that consumers are now spending almost $10,000 a second on Amazon.com. But what specifically happens in the extraction space? Well, a couple of areas that spring to mind of how attractions have opened to online in recent months. I was reading about the Louvre Museum, which responded to their customers' obviously desire to engage with their famous exhibits by putting them digitally online, putting content online. And the response was amazing. Their daily website visitors went from 40,000 a day before the pandemic to 400,000 during the quarantine period. And to give some perspective to this, in 1 month during the crisis, the Louvre Museum received as many visitors as the museum did physical ones in the whole of 2019. Zoos have done a lot with webcams, partly to engage and entertain their customers, and also to remind them that whilst the animals are still here, they need support with the financial donations that are imperative that whilst the zoo was closed. We've all been using Zoom, and the uptake in online platforms like Zoom has been widely reported, but highlights that all aspects of society, work and family life, and all generations of people were adopting more digital means to communicate and go about their daily lives. So why is this? Now, e-commerce is a necessary tool to limit person-to-person contact, obviously, in physical space, but it's becoming more embedded in our daily lives, and retailers are rising to the occasion. Personal shopping services have started, like Instacart in the US. Buying groceries online and having them delivered has become a mainstay in many communities. I'm in the UK, and Tesco delivery time slots were famously hard to book because demand simply exceeded supply for time slots, for example. Another British retailer, of fashion and household goods, John Lewis, had a huge pivot towards online trading, where almost overnight their entire online channel became the mainstay of their business. It allowed them to minimize the impact of their physical stores being shut during the pandemic. And they've gone on to a great success. Nielsen research we looked at identified 6 key consumer behavior threshold trends which were related to the coronavirus, which reveal that consumers were thinking about key spending patterns that emerged. Now, each stage is closely tied to a progression in local events surrounding COVID, which they called an event marker, and a subsequent behavioural shift, top boxes. The first stage is related to consumers starting to deal with the immediate crisis at hand a few months ago. And certainly by stage 3 is where we saw a lot of the news coverage around borders closing and quarantine starting, which related to things like people stockpiling items. We've all had those kind of stories of whatever it was, toilet roll or bread. But then when we got to the time we get to stage 4, we see consumers beginning to adapt their mindset and behaviours. This is where we see an increase not just in the number of sales, but also a new reliance on online shopping setting in. And this trend is particularly to carry into what we're obviously now starting to call the new normal. The second mindset shift was around safety. Back in the days pre-COVID, there was a big differentiator in how consumers picked their brands. Now, safety measures are starting to determine whether or not a consumer buys from a hospitality business, for example. To demonstrate this, a survey by Senate was published on hospitality tech that stated that more than 2/3 of consumers admitted their loyalty to their favourite brand would be impacted by the measure they put in place to deal with COVID. Now, I've talked to many parks and attractions who had, I guess you've got 2 major headlines to report on safety. Firstly was the obvious one. They wanted to put in place processes to keep their guests safe and to comply with government social distancing rulings, but ultimately just to attract guests back to their parks. But the second reason I found just interesting, and it was simply that they had to be seen to be doing the right thing. They just couldn't afford to not be seen doing absolutely everything possible to keep their guests safe. They fear that one photo on Instagram of an overcrowded park, or a viral video with exceptionally long queues, or operational staff not wearing face coverings would instantly ruin all the positive marketing they were trying to put out, trying to promote the safety of their parks. So doing nothing wasn't an option. Going back to some other hospitality tech research, I know some other interesting facts, and 53% of customers say they feel that safety measures put in place by their favourite brands simply not been adequate. And 1 in 4 have actually stopped shopping with a brand altogether because they felt unsafe during a recent visit. But conversely, shoppers are now twice as loyal when retailers make the maximum effort to protect their health and safety. Again, a personal experience, I had this exact experience from my first venture back into the retail world when lockdown eased, and today we'll generally return to the specific clothes shop, I won't name them, but that they back in the day put my safety as the highest priority, being honest. My welfare was more important to them whether or not I bought anything, and their immediate short-term profit ambitions. So, and I remember that. That's kind of where that brand loyalty's come from. And similarly in the theme park world, theme parks which are seen wiping down in coasters between rotations, despite the build-up of waiting guests, are doing so not just for the sanitation requirements, but also to be seen to be putting their customers' health first and foremost. Let's also take payment terminals as an example. Customers having to engage with payment terminals ultimately when they're on site, particularly with preference now to use card rather than cash payments. And this leads to an often high volume of people using the same payment terminal within a short period of time, which has understandably caused some anxiety amongst consumers. And 38% of consumers in this survey trust staff to correctly disinfect payment terminals after every use. And half believe that responsibility with them should be taken away from staff members and instead ideally passed on to maybe a different technology solution altogether. So the trust really isn't completely there from consumers' point of view. And the overwhelming majority, I think about 89% of consumers, said they would accept a delay, a physical delay of up to say 30 seconds between each transaction at a payment terminal if it meant it was thoroughly clean. Now, that's all very well and good, and these things aren't easy to do, and the changes would have cost ramifications which have to take into account. But the bottom line, though, is that consumer needs and preferences are changing, and business to seek loyal customers must be agile in their efforts to attract and ultimately to retain them. So what are the implications for the cultural and the attractions industry? So for this, we can turn to some analysis provided by Accenture. They rightly highlight that consumers will now be visiting our attractions with new behaviours and expectations, like we've already discussed. But they also outline 3 areas where companies should seek to meet these new needs of consumers when they reopen. And the first is around reassuring guests and also employees and being aware that these emotions and opinions will be subject to change as the months go on. Second is about creating stability, whilst dealing with new technologies to offer frictionless transactions and the ability to scale with as demand increases. And lastly, how to reconfigure the offerings and embrace new systems, partnerships to retain both new and existing customers. So what are the strategies venues are turning for that safe reopening? Well, firstly, venues undoubtedly need a robust e-commerce site to take the place of their on-site ticketing counter, or definitely take a lot of demand from that. And now this needs to be capable of handling high volume transactions, a one-stop shop, if you were, for all its products offerings. Something has to be reliable, simple to manage, scalable, and easy for guests to use. The second thing is around capacity control. Now, ticketing needs to be sophisticated enough to handle revised operational plans. Date and time slot specific tickets are the obvious strategies. Many venues have deployed those, but also be properly connected to access control systems and processes that allow guests into the park at the correct times on the correct ticket. But also integration of your ticketing sources is a must. Everyone needs access to the same live inventory. Now, I don't mean just connecting online and offline systems into well-integrated technology, but also connecting all resellers. There is no point, for example, in having a third-party ticket reseller selling a voucher, or which then needs or requires the guest to queue up on the day on site to redeem it for a real ticket, and then only to be told that actually the venue is full on that day and they can't enter anyway. You know, an awful guest experience. So all needs to be integrated and connected together. Which brings me on to the topic of communication, and communication is a must. Guests may be reluctant to visit, so ease their concerns with transparent and an absolute abundance of consistent communication is key. And as we mentioned before, most venues are becoming cashless, and contactless transactions are on the rise. In addition, the pre-ordering of food and beverage items via mobile apps has seen a huge spike as guests don't want to queue, nor want to have to worry about the process of making a physical order. Instead, they just pay on their phones and are alerted when their food is ready at a collection point. So we can now relate these shifts in recent customer demand to look at some of the successes attractions have had when building a new guest journey aimed at meeting the needs of their consumers in this new world. So the first one I want to talk about was Holiday World. Holiday World wanted to reopen safely, but knew they had to rethink every part of their offering. Their big challenge was to find a way to promote social distancing throughout the entire guest journey, but particularly while guests waited in line for rides. Now, this wasn't an easy task, however, as creating the 2-meter gaps between guests in lines for some of their key rides would mean that the physical queue lines would have to be longer than, I think it was about 2 football pitches in length, not viable on the footprint of their site, and therefore they adapted a virtual queuing strategy for their guests to use instead. The result, they were able to reopen safely, and their introduction of virtual queues has not only resulted in safer and happier customers, but also with an increase in per head spending throughout the park. The reason being, guests not held in physical queue lines are instead free to enjoy other areas of the park and also spend more time and money on retail and food items. So it's been a kind of a double win for Holiday World. Second business is Village Roadshow, who wanted to unify their guest experience across their 5 parks in Australia. They really want to alleviate the pain points of long wait times in their park, and also give the guests all the information they needed to plan and enjoy their visit for longer. The solution, Village Roadshow implemented both a successful ticketing system to help drive purchasing online. They also launched a mobile app and used accesso's guest experience management platform and a virtual queuing system. And the result of all this was that Village Roadshow eliminated wait times to enter the park. First win. And can now provide guests with interactive maps through the app to help direct foot traffic and also generate live feedback, real-time feedback, and then some opportunities for the guests to be able to plan their next visit in advance. So a real kind of data win for them too. And then the last client I was fortunate enough to be working on this project myself was with Parc Asterix, just outside Paris in France. Now, their challenge was they wanted to be seen as a very pioneering park and also acknowledge their guest concerns in light of the pandemic, especially around complying with social distancing and queue lines, and to manage and encourage the spread of guests across the whole footprint of the park. The solution was accesso's 100% virtual queue line system, and this provided a new dedicated web page and also the option of a wearable wristband for non-smartphone users, which allowed guests with the ability to reserve a space in a live virtual queue line. And the way this worked essentially is like a physical queue line. It works dynamically. So it responds to demand for the ride throughput, any ride downtime, I should say, and intelligently call people to the front of the queue onto the rides when it was their turn to do so. Digging a bit deeper, they actually used a hybrid virtual queuing approach at the park, which their less popular rides still allowed for guests to stand in a traditional physical queue line at a social distancing gaps, but the more popular attractions were 100% virtual queuing. And the platform has worked excellently for their guests, and the park is now scaling up to use virtual queuing, and I think it's about 13 rides and shows for the rest of the year. And looking to the future, Parc Asterix now has a system in place that allows them to cater for an increase in capacity when the authorities allow them to sell more tickets, which is great. And they've used the opportunity presented by COVID to change their offering and their guest experience forever. So in the third section, we need to think about collectively what can attractions, what steps can attractions take to embrace the opportunity to transform their businesses across the complete guest journey to move towards a more people-first, empathy-based approach. And we'll come and look at the physical changes parks are making in a moment, but we also need to think about the ways which attractions are engaging with guests to anticipate their needs, not just when they're on site, but also within the complete engagement with the park's brand or the attraction's brand. So this starts pre-visit. How can you anticipate the needs of your guests and give them confidence to purchase tickets, ultimately, but also how can you help them plan their day in advance? What areas will they want to visit? What rides will they maybe want to enjoy? Can they book a once-in-a-lifetime experience that may be available to them? There are cutting-edge e-commerce tools now that can focus on a guest, that can focus a guest on thinking not just about buying a ticket, but the various upsells, cross-sells, opportunities that can be offered in advance of their visit, not only to capture their revenue in advance, but also to make it smoother and more enjoyable for the guests on the day itself. Attractions like zoos and museums that rely on loyal membership holders can start to focus their pre-visit communications, not just on encouraging visitors to members to visit, which, as an aside, now involves booking a specific time slot, which removes some of the impulse benefits of going essentially whenever a member wants to. But these venues can now use the fact that members are now online to engage their participation in not just buying tickets, but specific member-only events, new exhibitions that might be going on, or ideally getting them to renew their membership for another 12 months, simply at the click of a button. So what about during the visit? Venues need to consider how guests are flowing throughout the venue. How are they experiencing the attractions, dining areas, the retail areas? How are staff interacting with guests? Are there friction points that you can reduce? Are lines building up at pinch points, or are guests struggling to comply with social distancing at certain times or areas? And as we discussed earlier, ultimately a venue needs to address how its overall business and its brand is being viewed by the customers when on site. And we're responding to these views with empathy, through better communication, better staff engagement, or with real-time innovative technology is the key to that on-site success. And then post-visit, can a venue really build on its loyalty with those guests? And yes, they can learn from guests with, I guess you'd call them post-site visit surveys, and it can look at its data to reveal trends and patterns in how consumers behave in this new normal, and that's very important. But again, technology can help with sending personalized follow-up messages and inviting feedback just as the client leaves, say, the parking lot, and therefore gives honest, real-time appraisal of their day and interaction with the attractions brand. In operations, it has to be a perspective change too. You have to look for small opportunities to improve the guest experience. Now, the philosophy of Kanzan originates from Japan, as some of you probably will know, and translates to means change for the good. Kaizen acknowledges acknowledges a room for improvement, I should say, in everything, and seeks to discover small incremental changes over a long term. This style of transformation allows for more manageable and employee-friendly implementation. And sports teams are famously used the concept of marginal gains. Over the years, lots of seemingly small improvements, but when made continuously, can lead to a fundamental shift in performance, which is often the difference in their will between winning and losing. Those small gains have a big impact. And attractions and destinations, we can absolutely use the same mindset to continuously improve our operations as we enter the new normal in 2021. The topic of guest feedback leads us to the subject of dealing with frustrated guests. And I think it's fair to say that whilst consumers do expect retailers, attractions and suppliers to have evolved their way of operating in response to COVID, they also give these businesses an element of compassion and grace period to get it right. And they understand that this has not been easy for operators either. Empathy, I guess, runs both ways at the end of the day. That said, there do seem to be kind of 4 key areas that we've identified that venues do have to address to reduce frustration and to remove negative feedback. First one, making ticketing sales online as intuitive and easy as possible is key. Removing those mixed messages or conflicting advice in pre-arrival communications. Thirdly, removing areas where guests will feel anxious. Queue lines at the entrance and for rides or shows are the obvious pinch points that will cause that anxiety. And then also really experience the venue in the way your guests do. So look for opportunities to minimize frustration, say around food lines, for example, by looking at mobile food ordering apps. Look for opportunities to remove that frustration during their visit and even in the process of planning their visit. Small changes, as we said, have a big impact. Take it step by step, piece by piece, day by day. And with accesso, I have 3 other tips to manage change. One is keep a running list of what you'd like to improve at your venue. It seems obvious, but in this time of reduced staffing, if you can really keep a list, that's really going to help everybody. Plan out what you'd like to accomplish during these changes. And finally, really, and probably most importantly, really try and engage your team members in the process. They are the closest to your guests and our consumers themselves. So listen to their ideas, analyze their behaviors, and engage with them more than ever before. We at accesso offer a platform for attractions to engage guests with pre-arrival preparation in a one-stop shop mobile application. It's called T2. Now, not only can guests book their tickets and schedule their day at attraction, we can also give them clear instructions and preparation tasks to ensure a safe and fun day whilst they're on site. Allowing them to answer health questions and disclaimers in advance of their visit, as well as confirm personal details in their consumer profile. Pre-preparation notifications, for example, can be set to enable responses and communication in real time. Some specific examples are being able to alert guests who have not completed a health questionnaire, for example, or you can send a real-time notification alert, something like the entrance turnstiles are becoming particularly overcrowded, please remain in your car. Quite a simple one for reducing build-up in entrance areas for a short period of time. Or even for crowd dispersal, a message can go out to audience, when you enter the park, please turn left to the adventure zone. And that's to kind of manage to get to a certain area of the park and away from obviously busy areas. But then throughout the day, guests can virtually queue for rides through the app, as we discussed before. Guests can be encouraged to move throughout the venue zones to prevent overcrowding through what we call an experience crowd alerts. And the interactive map. Guests can order food so that it's ready for them when they arrive at their restaurant. And finally, and most importantly, guests get to share real-time feedback about their experiences for operators to get live updates and opinions on the people that ultimately matter most. All venues across the world have started taking steps, and we at accesso are ready to assist operators looking to engage with new ideas and consumer behaviours, and find like-minded partners and learn from their counterparts as we collectively look to engage our consumers in the new normal. Hope you found this session informative, and thank you for watching. To learn more or to share your own experiences, please feel free to email sales@accesso.com. We will now open the floor to some questions. Thanks for watching.